Welcome to Legacy Letters Unsealed, the channel where forgotten letters, hidden for decades, finally reveal the stories that shaped entire families. Each episode begins with a single envelope, sealed by time, opened by fate. Behind every handwriting lies heartbreak, forgiveness, secrets, and truths that were never meant to be discovered. These are emotional stories inspired by real letters found in attics, trunks, inheritances, and abandoned boxes. If you love deeply human stories that touch the soul, you're in the right place. Today's story takes us to a small town in Ohio, where David Mercer, a 42-year-old man, has just lost his mother. For his entire life, David carried one unshakable truth. His father abandoned him when he was just 5 years old. He grew up believing he wasn't wanted, that he wasn't enough. But as David empties his childhood home, sorting through decades of memories and dust, he finds something hidden in the back of his mother's closet. A shoebox. Inside, dozens of letters, all addressed to him, all unopened. And on the very top, one envelope with a title written in fading blue ink. To my son who will hate me. What David is about to discover will shatter everything he thought he knew about his life. This is a story about the lies we're told, the love we never knew existed, and the courage it takes to face the truth when it comes 37 years too late. The house smelled like loss, not just the sharp, sterile scent of hospital cleaners that still clung to David's clothes, but something deeper. The scent of a life lived in silence, of rooms that held secrets longer than they held warmth. David Mercer stood in the hallway of his childhood home, surrounded by boxes and the ghosts of everything he'd tried to forget. His mother had been dead for 3 days. The funeral was over. The condolences had dried up. Now it was just him and the house and the unbearable quiet. He hadn't wanted to come back here. This place had never felt like home, not really. It was the place where he learned to be alone, even when his mother was in the next room. The place where he learned that fathers were men who disappeared, and sons were the ones left behind to wonder why. David moved through the rooms mechanically, packing things he didn't want into boxes he'd donate to strangers. His mother had been a meticulous woman, everything in its place, everything controlled. Even in death she'd left instructions, a will, a list, no mess, no emotion, just like she'd lived. He was in her bedroom when he found it. He'd been clearing out the closet, pulling down old coats and dresses that smelled of mothballs and disappointment, when his hand hit something solid in the back corner. A box. Not just any box. An old Nike shoebox from the 90s, the orange logo faded to almost nothing. It was tied shut with rough twine, knotted so many times it looked like his mother had been afraid it would open on its own. David's hands shook as he pulled the box down. Something about it felt wrong. Or maybe it felt too right. He sat on the edge of his mother's bed, the same bed where she'd taken her last breath, and slowly untied the knots. Inside, the box was full of envelopes. Dozens of them, maybe more than 100. All yellowed with age, their edges soft and fragile. Some had stamps from the 80s, others from the 90s. A few looked more recent, their paper not quite as aged. Every single one was addressed to him. David Mercer, his childhood address. Then his college dorm. Then addresses he'd lived at years ago and almost forgotten. They'd been forwarded, returned, marked, "Return to sender" in his mother's tight, furious handwriting. And they'd all been hidden. Never opened, never read, never delivered. David's throat closed. His hands trembled as he lifted the first envelope from the top of the pile. This one was different. Thicker. And across the front, in the same fading blue ink that marked all the others, someone had written a title in large, desperate letters. To my son, who will hate me. David's heart hammered in his chest. He knew that handwriting. Or he thought he did. It was buried somewhere in the few fragmented memories he still had of being 5 years old. Of a man with kind eyes and rough hands who used to lift him onto his shoulders. A man his mother said had left them. A man David had spent his whole life hating. His father. Thomas Mercer. David tore open the envelope. The letter inside was written on simple lined paper, the kind you'd buy at a corner store. The ink was faded in places, but the words were still clear, still raw, Still heartbreaking. To my son who will hate me, it began. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if you'll ever know the truth. But I have to write it anyway, because if I don't, I'll go crazy. I'll lose the last piece of hope I have left. David, I didn't leave you. I know that's what your mother told you. I know that's what you believe. But I need you to know, even if you never believe me, even if you hate me forever, I didn't leave you. I was taken from you. And I've spent every single day of the last 37 years trying to get back to you. David's vision blurred. He blinked hard, but the tears came anyway, hot and fast and unstoppable. His hand shook so badly he almost dropped the letter. He forced himself to keep reading. Your mother and I divorced when you were 5. I won't lie and say it was easy. We fought. We hurt each other. But I never stopped loving you. Never. After the divorce, she got custody. I got supervised visits every other weekend. I thought that was the start. I thought I'd still be your father. I was wrong. The first time I showed up for my visit, she wouldn't answer the door. I could see you through the window playing with your toy trucks. You looked up and saw me. You smiled, but she pulled you away. The second time she called the police, said I was harassing her. The third time, she'd moved. No forwarding address, no phone number, just gone. David's chest tightened. He couldn't breathe. He kept reading, each word a knife. I hired a lawyer. I spent every cent I had fighting for you in court. But your mother was smart. She had a job. I was just a construction worker. She had a clean record. I had a temper I'd lost once in our marriage, and she made sure the judge knew about it. She said I was dangerous. She said you were afraid of me. She lied, David. She lied, and the judge believed her, and I lost you. But I didn't stop trying. I wrote to you every week. I sent birthday cards, Christmas presents. I called when I could find a number. I showed up at your school once just to see you from a distance, just to make sure you were okay. She got a restraining order. I was a danger, she said, a threat. But I wasn't, David. I was just a father who loved his son. The letter went on. Page after page of desperation, of love, of a man who'd been erased from his son's life and refused to disappear. I know you'll hate me. The letter ended. I know you'll think I'm lying. I know you'll wonder why, if I really loved you, I didn't try harder. But I did try, David. I tried until I had nothing left. And then I kept trying. I'm still trying. Even now, writing this letter I know you'll never read. I'm trying. Because you're my son. And I love you. I will always love you. No matter how much you hate me. No matter how much time passes. No matter what. David sat there in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by a lifetime of lies, and wept. The box was full of letters, hundreds of them, one for every week of 37 years. His father had never stopped writing, had never stopped trying, and his mother had hidden every single one. David didn't know how long he sat there. Time felt meaningless. Eventually, he opened another letter, then another. Each one was a window into a life he'd never known existed, his father's life. A life lived in longing and hope and the kind of love that refuses to die even when it's buried alive. There were letters about Thomas's life, about the jobs he worked, the small trailer he lived in, the lonely Christmases he spent staring at old photos of a son who'd forgotten his face. There were letters about David's life too, things Thomas had found out somehow. David's high school graduation, his college acceptance, his first job. His father had been watching from the shadows, tracking the life of a son he couldn't touch, celebrating milestones he'd never be invited to. One letter, dated December 25, 1995, read, Merry Christmas, David. You're 13 now. I wonder if you still like dinosaurs. I remember you used to carry that plastic T-Rex everywhere. I bought you a book about paleontology this year. I know you'll never get it, but I bought it anyway. It's sitting on my table, wrapped in newspaper because I can't afford real wrapping paper. I'll keep it here, just in case. Just in case one day you walk through my door, and I can give it to you. Merry Christmas, son. I love you. David's heart shattered. He thought of himself at 13, angry, sullen, hating a father he thought had abandoned him. He'd spent that Christmas barely speaking to his mother, resenting her for being the only parent who'd stayed. And all the while, his father had been out there, wrapping a gift in newspaper, hoping for a miracle that never came. David pulled out another letter. This one was from 2003. He would have been 21. David, I saw you today. I know I'm not supposed to. I know the restraining order is still active, but I couldn't help it. I was working a construction job downtown, and you walked right past me. You didn't recognize me. Why would you? You haven't seen me in 16 years. But I knew you instantly. You have my eyes, my walk. You looked so much like the boy I lost, but all grown up. A man now. I wanted to call out to you. I wanted to run after you and grab your shoulders and tell you everything. But I didn't, because I knew you'd think I was crazy. Or worse, you'd remember me and hate me. So I just watched you go, and then I went home and cried for 3 hours. I'm sorry, David. I'm sorry I can't be the father you deserved. I'm sorry your mother took that from both of us. I'm sorry for everything. David couldn't stop the sobs now. They tore out of him, raw and ugly and full of 37 years of misdirected rage. He'd hated his father his entire life. He'd blamed him for every lonely birthday, every Father's Day that passed in silence, every moment he'd felt unwanted. And it had all been a lie. His mother had stolen his father from him. She'd taken a man who loved him and turned him into a ghost. She'd made David hate the one person who'd never stopped fighting for him. And now she was dead, and David couldn't even confront her, couldn't scream at her, couldn't demand to know why. The anger was a living thing inside him, but it had nowhere to go. His mother was ashes. His father was a stranger, and David was alone in a house full of lies. Holding the only truth he'd ever been given, he read through the night. Letter after letter after letter. By the time the sun rose, David had read them all. He knew his father's life now, knew the pain he'd carried, knew the hope that had kept him writing long after most men would have given up. And David knew something else, too. He knew he had to find him. Thomas Mercer, his father. The man who'd loved him from a distance for 37 years. David didn't know if it was too late, didn't know if his father would even want to see him after all this time. But he had to try. Because if his father could spend 37 years trying, David could at least try once. He found his father's address in the most recent letter, a small trailer park on the outskirts of town. David didn't call ahead, didn't warn him. He just got in his car and drove. The box of letters on the passenger seat like a fragile, precious thing. The trailer park was quiet when David pulled up, the kind of place where people lived when they had nowhere else to go. The trailers were old, their metal sides streaked with rust and time, but they were clean, well kept, dignified, in a way that spoke of people who'd lost everything but their pride. David found the address easily. Number 47. A small silver trailer with a wooden deck out front. There were wind chimes hanging from the awning, and a single chair sat on the deck, facing the sunrise. David's hands shook as he climbed the steps. He knocked, and waited, and then the door opened, and there he was. Thomas Mercer, 67 years old. His hair was white now, thinning on top. His face was lined with decades of sun and sorrow. His hands were gnarled and calloused, the hands of a man who'd worked hard his whole life and had little to show for it. But his eyes were the same, blue-gray and kind. The same eyes David saw in the mirror every morning. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Thomas stared at David like he was seeing a ghost, like he didn't dare believe it was real. And then his face crumpled. David, he whispered. His voice cracked on the name. David nodded. He couldn't speak. His throat was too tight. Thomas stepped forward, hesitant, like he was afraid David would disappear if he moved too fast. Is it really you? David nodded again, and then he held up the box, the shoebox full of letters. I found them, David said, his voice breaking. I found all of them. Thomas's eyes went to the box, and the color drained from his face. He staggered back, one hand going to the doorframe to steady himself. Oh, God, he breathed. Oh, God, you read them. All of them, David whispered. And then he did something he hadn't done since he was 5 years old. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his father. Thomas froze for half a second, like he couldn't believe it was happening. And then he broke. He wrapped his arms around David and held him like he'd been waiting 37 years to do it. Which he had. And they stood there on the deck of that old trailer, two men who'd been strangers for most of their lives, and they cried. They cried for the birthdays missed and the Christmases stolen. They cried for the lies and the lost time. They cried because they'd finally found each other, but they'd lost so much along the way. When they finally pulled apart, Thomas was shaking. He looked at David like he was afraid to blink, afraid David would vanish. "Come in," he said hoarsely. "Please, come in." The inside of the trailer was small but spotless. The furniture was old, but everything was clean and carefully arranged. And on the walls there were pictures, dozens of them. Pictures of David, school photos, grainy printed images from the internet, newspaper clippings from David's college graduation announcement. Thomas had been collecting pieces of his son's life for decades, building a shrine to a boy he couldn't have. David's breath caught. He turned to his father, and Thomas looked away, embarrassed. "I know it's strange," Thomas said quietly. "I know you probably think I'm crazy, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let you go. Even when I knew I'd lost you, I couldn't let you go." David shook his head. Tears were streaming down his face again. "You didn't lose me," he said, his voice fierce. "She took me. She stole me from you, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I believed her. I'm so sorry I hated you." Thomas's face twisted. He reached out and grabbed David's shoulders, his grip strong despite his age. "No," he said firmly. "No. You were a child. You believed what you were told. This is not your fault, David. Do you hear me? This is not your fault." They sat down at Thomas's small kitchen table, and they talked. For hours. For the first time in 37 years they talked. Thomas told David about the legal battles, about the money he'd spent trying to fight for custody, money he didn't have, about the jobs he'd worked, the overtime he'd pulled, just to afford another lawyer, another court filing, another desperate attempt, about the restraining order that had made him a criminal for loving his son, about the nights he'd driven past David's house, just to see a light on in his room, just to know he was okay. David told Thomas about his childhood, about growing up angry and confused, about the hole in his heart that he'd tried to fill with resentment, about the years he'd spent thinking he wasn't good enough, wasn't worth staying for, about the relationships he'd ruined because he didn't know how to trust, didn't know how to believe someone could love him and not leave. They talked about David's mother, about the woman she'd been. Thomas didn't speak with anger. He spoke with sadness. "She was hurt," Thomas said quietly. "When we divorced, she was hurt, and she wanted me to hurt too. I don't think she meant for it to go this far. I think she started lying to protect herself, and then she couldn't stop. She built a whole life on those lies. And by the time you were old enough to ask questions, she was too deep in to tell the truth." David wanted to be angry, wanted to rage. But sitting there, looking at his father's tired, kind face, all he felt was grief. Grief for what they'd lost. Grief for the childhood he should have had. Grief for his mother, who'd died alone, clutching her secrets to the end. "What do we do now?" David asked finally. "How do we fix this?" Thomas looked at him for a long moment, and then he smiled. It was a sad, weary smile, but it was real. "We don't fix it," he said. "We can't. The past is gone, David. We can't get it back. But we can start now. We can start today." David nodded slowly. "I want that," he whispered. "I want to know you. I want to make up for lost time." Thomas reached across the table and took David's hand. His grip was strong, steady, the grip of a man who'd held on through 37 years of darkness. "Then we will," he said. "One day at a time. We'll figure it out." And they did. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of what they'd lost was too much. Days when David would sit in his car outside his father's trailer and cry because he couldn't believe how much time they'd wasted. There were days when Thomas would see David do something, a gesture or a smile, and he'd remember the little boy he'd lost, and the grief would be unbearable. But there were good days too. Days when they'd sit together and talk for hours. Days when Thomas would teach David how to fix an engine or build a bookshelf, things a father should have taught his son decades ago. Days when David would show Thomas pictures of his life, filling in all the gaps, all the years Thomas had missed. Slowly, carefully, they built something new. Not the relationship they should have had. That was gone. But something real. Something worth fighting for. One afternoon, 6 months after David had knocked on his father's door, they sat together on the deck of Thomas's trailer, watching the sunset. The box of letters sat between them. David had kept it. He'd read through the letters again and again, each time finding something new, some small detail that broke his heart or made him smile. "Do you regret it?" David asked suddenly. "Writing all those letters even though you knew I'd never read them?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No," he said. "Because I had to believe you would. I had to believe that one day, somehow, you'd know the truth. And I was right. It took 37 years, but I was right." David smiled. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was real. "Yeah," he said softly. "You were right." They sat in silence for a while, the wind chimes singing softly in the evening breeze. And then David said, "I love you, Dad." It was the first time he'd called Thomas Dad since he was 5 years old. Thomas's breath hitched. He turned to look at David, and his eyes were bright with tears. "I love you too, son," he said. "I always have. I always will." And in that moment, sitting together in the fading light, they were finally home. The story of David and Thomas Mercer is a story of love that refused to die, even when it was buried. It's a story of lies that destroyed a family, and truth that came too late to change the past, but just in time to change the future. It's a reminder that some bonds can't be broken no matter how hard the world tries. Because a father's love doesn't end when the letters stop arriving. It doesn't end when the courts say it's over. It doesn't end when decades pass in silence. A father's love endures, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, it finds its way home. But finding each other was only the beginning. Because the truth, once uncovered, has a way of spreading, and not everyone was ready to hear it. 3 weeks after their reunion, David received a phone call from his Aunt Linda, his mother's younger sister. She'd heard through the family grapevine that David had been spending time with Thomas. Her voice on the phone was sharp, accusatory. "How could you?" she demanded. "After everything that man put your mother through? After he abandoned you?" David felt something cold settle in his chest. "He didn't abandon me," he said quietly. "Mom lied. She kept his letters from me. For 37 years. There was silence on the other end. Then, "That's not true. Your mother would never—" "I have the letters, Aunt Linda. Hundreds of them. All unopened. All hidden. She kept them from me my entire life." The silence stretched longer this time. When Linda spoke again, her voice was different. Smaller. "I don't believe you." "Then come see them," David said. "Come see the proof." She came the next day. David met her at his mother's house. The box of letters spread across the dining room table. Linda stood in the doorway, staring at the envelopes like they were something dangerous. David didn't say anything. He just picked up one letter and handed it to her. A birthday card from when David was 8. The envelope was still sealed. The return address was Thomas's. Linda's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a simple card with a cartoon dinosaur on the front. "Happy 8th birthday, David," it read in cheerful letters. And below, in Thomas's careful handwriting, "I hope you're having the best day. I got you a present, but I don't know how to get it to you. So I'm keeping it here just in case. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Love, Dad." There was a $20 bill tucked inside, crisp and new, saved for a birthday that had passed 3 decades ago. Linda's face crumpled. She sank into a chair, the card still clutched in her hand. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, Margaret, what did you do?" David handed her another letter, and another. Linda read them all, tears streaming down her face. When she finally looked up at David, her eyes were red and devastated. "I didn't know. she said hoarsely. "David, I swear to you I didn't know. Your mother told us he'd left. She said he didn't want anything to do with you. We believed her. We all believed her. Did you?" David asked. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Did you really? Or did you just not ask questions?" Linda flinched. She looked away, ashamed. "I should have asked," she admitted. "I should have questioned it. Thomas loved you so much when you were little. I remember that. I remember how he used to look at you like you were the most precious thing in the world. And then suddenly he was gone and your mother wouldn't talk about him and we just let it go. We chose the easy lie over the hard truth." David felt the anger rise in him, hot and bitter. "Do you have any idea what that did to me?" he said, his voice shaking. "Growing up thinking my own father didn't want me, do you know what that feels like? To be a kid and believe you're not worth staying for?" Linda sobbed. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "David, I am so sorry. We failed you. Your mother failed you. And we failed you by not seeing it." David wanted to rage at her, wanted to make her feel even a fraction of the pain he'd carried for 37 years. But looking at her, broken and crying over his mother's lies, he felt the anger drain away. She was a victim, too. They all were. His mother had poisoned everyone with her lies. "He's a good man," David said finally. "My father. He's kind and patient and he never stopped loving me. Not once in 37 years. And I want you to meet him." Linda looked up, shocked. "You want—" "He's my father," David said firmly. "And if you want to be part of my life, you need to accept that. You need to see him for who he really is, not who Mom told you he was." Linda was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll meet him." David arranged a dinner at a small restaurant in town. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet booth where they could talk without being overheard. Thomas was nervous. David could see it in the way his father's hands fidgeted with the napkin, the way his eyes kept darting to the door. "What if she hates me?" Thomas asked quietly. "What if she blames me?" "Then she's wrong," David said. "And I'll tell her that." When Linda arrived, she looked older than David remembered. The weight of the truth had aged her. She stood awkwardly by the table, staring at Thomas like she was seeing a ghost. Thomas stood slowly. He held out his hand. "Linda," he said quietly. "It's been a long time." Linda didn't take his hand. Instead, she started crying. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "Thomas, I'm so sorry. I believed her. I should have known. I should have looked for you. I should have—" "It's not your fault," Thomas said gently. He lowered his hand. Margaret was convincing. She had to be, to keep the lie going for so long. "But I could have stopped it," Linda insisted. "If I'd just asked questions. If I'd just cared enough to—" "You couldn't have known," Thomas interrupted. "And even if you'd suspected, what could you have done? She had the law on her side. She had custody. She had control. You couldn't have changed that." Linda sank into the booth, her face in her hands. David and Thomas exchanged a look. Then Thomas sat down across from her. "I spent a lot of years being angry," Thomas said quietly. "At Margaret, at the courts, at everyone who believed her lies. But anger doesn't change anything. It doesn't bring back the time I lost. It doesn't heal the hurt. All it does is eat you alive from the inside. So I let it go. Not because Margaret deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace." Linda looked up at him, her eyes red. "How?" she whispered. "How do you let go of something like that?" Thomas smiled sadly. "One day at a time," he said. "And by focusing on what I have now, instead of what I lost then. I have David back. That's more than I ever thought I'd get. I'm not going to waste whatever time we have left being angry." They talked for hours that night. Linda asked Thomas about his life, about the years he'd spent alone, about the letters he'd written. Thomas answered honestly, holding nothing back. And slowly, Linda began to see the man her sister had erased. The man who'd loved his son so deeply he'd kept writing letters for 37 years, even knowing they'd never be read. By the end of the night, Linda had apologized so many times David had lost count. But she'd also promised something more important. She'd promised to tell the rest of the family the truth, to set the record straight, to make sure everyone knew that Thomas Mercer wasn't the villain in this story. He never had been. Word spread quickly after that. David's extended family, the relatives who'd spent decades pitying him for having a deadbeat father, suddenly had to reckon with the truth. Some of them reached out to apologize. Others stayed silent, too ashamed to face what they'd believed. And a few, the stubborn ones who couldn't accept that Margaret had lied, cut David out of their lives entirely. He didn't mourn those losses. He'd spent too long caring what people thought, bending himself to fit the narrative his mother had created. He was done with that now. He had his father. That was enough. But there was one more piece of the story that needed resolution. One more person who deserved to know the truth. David's ex-wife, Sarah. They'd divorced 5 years ago, a messy, painful split that David had never fully understood. Sarah had said he was emotionally unavailable, that he couldn't let her in, that he built walls around his heart and refused to let anyone through. She'd been right, of course, but David hadn't known why, hadn't understood the root of his inability to trust, to believe that someone could love him and not leave. Now he did. He called Sarah on a Tuesday afternoon. She was surprised to hear from him. They hadn't spoken in years, not since the divorce papers were signed. "David?" she said cautiously. "Is everything okay?" "I need to tell you something," David said. "I need to explain. Can we meet?" They met at a coffee shop, neutral territory. Sarah looked good, happier than David remembered. She'd moved on, built a new life. He was glad for her. They sat across from each other, coffee growing cold between them, and David told her everything. About his mother's death, about the letters, about the father he'd spent his whole life hating, and the 37 years of lies that had kept them apart. Sarah listened without interrupting. When David finished, she was crying. "Oh, David," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "How could you?" David said. "I didn't even know. I spent our entire marriage believing I was broken because my father didn't want me. I couldn't trust you because I couldn't trust that anyone would stay. And now I know it was all a lie. My father did want me. He never stopped wanting me. I wasn't broken. I was just lied to." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "You weren't broken," she said firmly. "You were hurt. There's a difference." David nodded. Tears burned in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "For everything. For not being able to give you what you needed. For pushing you away." "I know," Sarah said gently. "And I forgive you. I forgave you a long time ago, David. I wish you'd known the truth back then. I wish we'd had a chance." "Me too," David said quietly. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Sarah squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you found him," she said. "Your father. I'm glad you finally got the truth." "Me too," David said again, and he meant it. They parted ways outside the coffee shop. Sarah hugged him, fierce and quick. And then she was gone, back to her new life. David watched her go and felt something shift inside him. A weight he hadn't even known he was carrying, lifting. He couldn't change the past. Couldn't get back the years with Sarah or the childhood with his father, or any of the 1,000 moments that had been stolen from him. But he could move forward. He could build something new. And he could do it with open eyes and an honest heart. That evening, David drove to his father's trailer. Thomas was on the deck, as usual, watching the sunset. He looked up when David climbed the steps, and a smile broke across his weathered face. "Hey, son," he said. "Didn't expect you tonight. I wanted to see you," David said simply. He sat down in the chair next to his father. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn gold and pink and purple. Then David said, "I told Sarah about everything." Thomas glanced at him. "How'd she take it?" "She cried," David said. "She forgave me, and she said she was glad I found you." Thomas nodded slowly. "She sounds like a good woman." "She was," David said. "I just wasn't ready to be loved back then. I didn't know how." "And now?" Thomas asked quietly. David thought about it. about the letters and the lies and the long, hard road that had brought him here. Now I do, he said. Now I understand that love doesn't always look the way you expect. Sometimes it's loud and obvious, and sometimes it's quiet, constant, written in letters that never get read but never stop coming. Either way, it's real, and it's worth holding on to. Thomas's eyes were bright with emotion. He reached over and squeezed David's shoulder. "I'm proud of you," he said hoarsely. "Your mother tried to destroy what we had, but you didn't let her win. You found your way back to me, and that took courage, David. Real courage." David felt his throat tighten. "I was so angry at you," he said, "for so long, and you didn't deserve any of it." "No," Thomas agreed. "I didn't. But you didn't deserve what was done to you either. We were both victims, David, and we're both survivors. That's what matters now." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire. And David realized something. He'd spent his whole life searching for home, for a place where he belonged, where he was wanted, where he was enough. He'd looked for it in relationships and jobs and addresses, never finding it, never understanding why. But he understood now. Home wasn't a place. It was a person, and he'd found his. After 37 years, he'd finally found his way home. The months turned into a year, then 2. David and Thomas built a relationship brick by brick, conversation by conversation, shared meal by shared meal. They went fishing together, fixed up an old car in Thomas's garage, celebrated holidays as a family for the first time in decades. David introduced Thomas to his friends. Thomas taught David how to play poker and told him stories about his grandparents, people David had never known. Slowly, the gap between them closed. Not completely. Some wounds are too deep to heal entirely. But enough. Enough to build something real and lasting. David started therapy. He'd resisted it for years, convinced he didn't need help, convinced he could handle his issues on his own. But the letters had cracked him open in a way nothing else ever had, and he couldn't put himself back together alone. His therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Reyes, helped him work through the trauma of parental alienation, the anger at his mother, the grief for the childhood he'd lost, the guilt that still haunted him in quiet moments. "You were a child, Dr. Idar," Reyes reminded him in session after session. "Children believe what they're told. That's not weakness, that's survival. You can't blame yourself for not knowing something you were deliberately kept from knowing." It took time, but David started to believe her, started to forgive himself for the years of misplaced hatred, the relationships he'd sabotaged, the walls he'd built. He'd done the best he could with the information he had. That was all anyone could do. And now he had new information, a new truth, and he could build a new life on that foundation. One day, David was sorting through old photos at his father's trailer when he found something unexpected. A small notebook tucked in the bottom of one of Thomas's drawers. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed. David opened it carefully. Inside, in his father's careful handwriting, was a journal. Entries dating back 37 years. David's breath caught. "Dad," he called. "What is this?" Thomas came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He saw the notebook and went still. That's private," he said quietly. "It's okay if you don't want me to read it," David said. "But, can you tell me what it is?" Thomas sat down heavily. He stared at the notebook like it was something sacred. "After I lost you," he said finally, "after the court said I couldn't see you anymore, I started having these dreams, nightmares really, that I'd forget you, that I'd forget what you looked like, what your voice sounded like, what it felt like to be your father. So I started writing down my memories, every single thing I could remember about you. The way you laughed, the games we played, the questions you asked. I was terrified I'd lose those memories, David. They were all I had left of you." David opened the notebook again, reading with new eyes. May 12th, 1989. One entry read, "David asked me today why the sky is blue. I tried to explain about light and atmosphere, but he just looked at me with those big eyes and said, 'But Dad, What if the sky is blue because it's happy? I told him maybe he was right. Maybe the sky is blue because it's happy to watch over us. He smiled at that. God, his smile lights up the whole world. David's vision blurred. He turned the page. December 20th, 1992, another entry read. Saw David at the grocery store today. He didn't see me. He's so much taller now. Margaret was with him and he was helping her carry bags. He's growing up to be a good kid. I'm so proud of him. I wish I could tell him that. I wish I could tell him anything. Page after page of memories. Of love. Of a father holding onto his son the only way he knew how. By writing him into existence over and over, refusing to let him disappear. I can't read this, David said, his voice breaking. Dad, I can't. You don't have to, Thomas said gently. He took the notebook back. I just wanted you to know. I never forgot you, David. Not for a single day. You were always real to me. Always mine. Even when you didn't know I existed. David broke. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed, all the grief and love and loss pouring out of him in great wrenching waves. Thomas held him, the way he'd wanted to hold him for 37 years. The way a father holds his son when the world is too much and words aren't enough. I'm here, Thomas murmured. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. Never again, David, never again. And in that moment, with his father's arms around him and 37 years of stolen time spread out between them like ghosts, David finally understood what it meant to be loved. Not because you were perfect, not because you earned it, but simply because you existed, because you were somebody's son, and that was enough. That had always been enough. The story of David and Thomas Mercer didn't have a fairy tale ending. There was no magic that could give them back the years they'd lost. No way to undo the damage Margaret's lies had caused. But they had something better than a fairy tale. They had the truth. And they had each other. And they had time. Not as much as they should have had. But enough to matter. Enough to build new memories on top of the old ones. Enough to prove that love, real love, doesn't die just because it's buried. It waits, patient and stubborn and unbreakable, waiting for the day when the truth finally comes to light. And when it does, when the letters are finally opened and the lies finally crumble, that love is still there. Weathered and scarred, but still standing, still strong, still true. Some stories don't end. They just begin, again, the end. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters. Leave a like to support our work. Share in the comments what you would do if you were in David's place. If you found a box of hidden letters that changed everything you believed about your life, how would you react? Your opinion might appear in the next video. Thank you for watching Legacy Letters Unsealed, where every letter holds a truth that was meant to be found.